Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I am joined by Caleb from Blandco, the YouTube channel. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well today. It is another cold and rainy overcast day in New Hampshire, but it's a perfect day to be talking about D&D right here.
Well, here in Jersey, it's a little chilly. I'm sure it's colder where you are than it is here.
I
Uh,
love the cold. It's been insane. I don't want to go from
yeah,
winter to miserable heat of summer. I don't want to have that happen. I want to have a nice little thing where you can get some cool breeze and some rain and be able to, walk around with a nice pretend it's the 90s and have your
yeah.
flannel on again and just walk around. That's what I want. So
Preach, brother, preach. I'm
I'm
all
very
for it.
happy with it.
Like I am not a fan of the heat. I'm an old fat guy and I sweat a lot. So when it's chilly like this or brisk out, I really enjoy it. It's also bright and sunny, so it's nice.
I'm fine with it. It's the extremes are starting to bother me now. I never
Yeah,
used to care about the snow because northern New York, you would get all the snow, but it wouldn't get bitter cold. In New Hampshire, there's a bitterness to the cold during the winter, which bugs me. And lately, the summers have been getting a little bit too hot at their peak.
yeah.
So yeah.
What are you gonna do? So, for anyone who's not familiar with you and what you do, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Blandco is.
All right. So my name is Caleb, and I run the Blandco channel. The Blandco channel originally was the sort of YouTube that I sort of created after I finished college, and I was doing college TV. And you get it in your head you want to do a production company for stuff. So the name Blandco is actually the name of my student production company for the stuff that I made for GSTV4, which was the Geneseo State television station that I was the executive producer at. So that channel was kind of just my personal channel for that stuff for a while. And I did put a lot of, video game content when I used to do that. Most of that stuff is gone. The vast majority of the video game content stopped. So in 2000, I believe, I want to say it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I really started to get into D&D, and I really wanted to do some video stuff because there really wasn't that many videos back then about inexpensive miniatures for D&D, alternative miniatures for D&D. There was a lot of cool stuff out there, especially back then, but nobody really talked about it all that much. There was a YouTube page called Ben's RPG Pile, and I believe that was one of the few, like literally one of the handful of channels out there that were discussing taking some of these other miniatures and adapting them for use in D&D stuff. And also there wasn't that many reviews of just the pre-painted D&D stuff. So that's where I started out. And really it just kind of went on from there, and I started doing more and more D&D content based on cheap miniatures, and then it kind of went into thrift store finds and stuff like that. And eventually my channel became more of a hybrid channel. I've been doing more crafting stuff this past year because unfortunately, due to circumstances, I've not been able to visit the thrift stores all that much. So yeah, man, I can't wait to go back. But as of this last couple of years, have not been able to do the thrift store thing. So it's more crafting. I've been doing vlogs about D&D. I did a section about that I called D&D News, but then Wizards of the Coast actually took that name for one of their own YouTube segments.
Yeah.
So I had to change that. So I do the D&D report now where I talk about D&D stuff. But yeah, mostly it is still focused on finding alternative stuff for D&D, reviewing D&D stuff, and yeah, a lot of different content. It's a mishmash, and it's frankly, if my channel would be a little bit more focused, maybe it'd be a little bit more popular. But that wouldn't be true to what I like to do, which is just a lot of random stuff, really.
Maybe maybe with the better weather coming, start checking out like flea markets, open air flea markets and
That's what I
stuff.
hope to do this summer, actually.
Yeah, an expansion. You know, you know, hard times cause us to innovate, and come up with new solutions.
Yeah, yeah.
So you could
The big
definitely.
thing that I really missed this year was the silent auction at the local game store. That has always provided some amazing stuff in terms of just, random stuff that people want to get rid of. Yeah, you never know what you're going to find at places like that.
Now I know a bunch of people that do like the other end when it comes to the gaming auctions, where they're like bidding high on classic like D&D stuff.
Yeah, it's weird. It makes me sad a little bit because when I first started getting interested, because it was probably like 10 years ago when I because I started in with I had a weird journey with RPGs. I started in with Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. When I was a kid, I had a brief period of time where I tried to get into D&D, but like somebody stole the classic module that I managed to get at a garage sale.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I just realized as a child, I had my garage sale treasure torn away from me. It's like, no wonder as an adult, I'm spending my time doing this.
You're trying to recreate your childhood, that one moment.
It's all just an attempt to get back that one moment where I found something really cool at a garage sale and another child scammed me out of it.
Do you remember what the module was?
I figured it out. It was something on the manor. It had to do with like there was a map of like someone's manor and like the hex grid stuff. And I have it written down what it was, but it was an old, it was an old advanced D&D module, I believe. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's just one of those things. A Dinosaur Island too, that featured into it.
Yeah.
Something to do with Dinosaur Island. It's just stuff like that. It's very much sad. I did a whole video on that, and somebody, I think in the comments, said exactly what the module probably was that I found.
The community is really good for that. You give them like even a tiny tidbit.
Oh, it's amazing.
Sherlock Holmes that stuff.
It blows my mind because like when I did the thrift store stuff and I found this random like it was like a random piece of terrain that I had found at a thrift store. And somebody managed to say, oh, yeah, that's from the talking golem set from the Lord of the Ring toy that released in this year. And it's like, how do you know that? Just from a random piece of plastic.
They're like,
how do you know that?
Caleb is X years old. He would have been X at the time. That would have been this year. So therefore, it can only be these modules. And
I did a video where like the weirdest D&D, the weirdest toys that I found at the thrift store. And it was a collection of just the strangest esoteric like things, like miniatures that I had found at the thrift store, the Goodwill by the pound in particular. And the chat, I think, was able to correctly identify every single one of them.
That's crazy. I mean, that's literally how we got some of our iconic D&D monsters anyway.
Oh yeah, no, that's the whole point. In my channel description, I talk about how Gary Gygax and had basically found a bag of cheap Chinese-made, Hong Kong-made toys, and like those are the D&D monsters that we're all still playing with today.
Was it the Rust Monster, the Owlbear, and a couple others?
Yep, the Boule, which is
the Boule.
I always forget his name. It's the Boule was by original. Yeah, I forgive me. I always forget his name, but it's the other guy who helped develop some of the original monsters. Dave Arneson? No. He still has a YouTube channel that he posts to.
Before too long in the chat, they're going to start putting in the name.
Yeah. I'm sure they will. This is the
So you also
that the reason I mentioned the Boule is because I found like what I think to be the original Boule in one of the stores.
Yeah.
Because like the paint job, because the Boule is one of those toys that they kept on producing up until like 2007 or something. It's crazy. Like the little cheap Chinese toy, you would still find that thing in like Chinese dinosaur toys. But the one that I found was so beat up and the paint looked pretty much exactly like the paint would look for the original little monster bag. And it was just like, I really honestly think this is like one of the original Boulets. I found that at a thrift store. It's crazy.
You never know what you're going to get at one of those thrift store finds. So, also, you've been known to consort with a puppet as well. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Kringle the Puppet, who is a helpful, fun little guy, has been on my channel. I made him as a puppet class where they like make puppets, and I made him with my very own hands. And you can tell he has wings. He was originally supposed to be like an owl bear puppet, but he is kind of his own little puppet guy now. So, yes, Kringle's a great puppet. He helped out with the local children's bookmobile, and he's a very charitable, lovely guy.
Yeah, how does he get along with the kids?
They love him. Kringle literally just has to sit there and wave at him, and they all wave back and are delighted by his antics because he's usually doing something fun. But yeah, no, Kringle is kind of like the sidekick of my channel. I've done a lot of good video stuff with him. But yeah, it's just one of those things of, you know, you got to get out there and try new stuff. I've never sewn before. I've never made a puppet before, but I went and I took a class, and I ended up making Kringle, who is going to probably be a lifelong companion to me at this point.
I think there's a high-end puppet class, and then there's one of those New England states put on by I think like people like the Jim Henson people.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah,
I know there's people.
So my brother,
I'm nearer towards Maine, and I know in Maine they do a lot of interesting puppet stuff. The puppet class,
so my brother actually interned at a puppet theater when he was in college, but also like he does this 3-dimensional art where he makes dolls essentially and builds dioramas and then photographs them. So I know he went up to one of those things and also did some puppet stuff as well. Fry Minis wants to know, how often does one watch a puppet?
Well, Kringle's made of felt. So you obviously, you know, he's got the classic, this is the classic hand and stick puppet. So basically, he's actually not finished. So he doesn't have the styrofoam parts that other puppets have. But he's still felt. So I would have to clean him very, very carefully. And I just basically protect him with my life. So he doesn't really need cleaning per se. I just make sure he's somewhere far away from my crafting explosions, so he can just kind of like sit in a corner, watching everything. So he's hopefully not going to get dirty with anything.
Observe from afar, out of the blast radius.
Yes. You never know when like paint is going to just explode randomly or whatnot.
Your crafting sounds very interesting. It sounds like it would be similar to If I Tried.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of, it really is a lot of like, you know, trial and error. You just have to try it out for yourself to see what techniques work the best. Well, I mean, like,
I haven't heard a crafter talk about so many explosions.
It's pretty common. I mean, like, I'm at my desk now, and like none of my paints are like nice and free. They're literally all covered in like, you know, paint and stuff. So it's just, you know, certain people are just going to be nice and precise. And, you know, you have people like Black Magic Craft who literally were like, you know, they built real structures for a full-time job. They were a contractor at some point. And then you have people like me who are always, you know, always wanted to build like little things, even when I was a little kid.
Like Wylock, like a nuclear physicist or something?
I don't know what Wylock is. Wylock is an interesting chap. But he definitely has a real job.
Yeah, and I think it has something to do with nuclear power plants. So
yeah, it's amazing to me, like all these people that are, you know, I mean, it's interesting how like the fabricators, 3D printers, and like crafting stuff, like, you know, the whole thing where somebody was watching a video and ended up using like some of the crafting tips they learned to help make props for like the Avengers movie or something. It's pretty wild.
So
But
Wally DM wants to know if Kringle were an NPC adventurer, what class would he be?
oh god, I mean, for he was if he was an NPC, I think he would just be like a commoner. I don't really think he's that like he's really not that useful. He might be like an entertainer of some sort, so maybe some sort of like bard or something like that.
Oh my god, I hope you have Kringle's poor ears covered at this point.
Yeah. No, Kringle knows. Kringle knows.
He knows.
Yeah.
No illusions. So you also do an improv D&D kind of like show.
Yeah.
Fry Minis has brought it up, and we were talking about it beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
want to talk about that a little?
So what happened is that originally I was doing it because RPAN was a new thing and I wanted to get interested in. For people that don't know, RPAN is the Reddit streaming service. So if you, it's of course, because it's Reddit, it's set up in a very bizarre way, which makes no sense. But they basically, you can stream to certain subreddits on Reddit any day of the week. But on Wednesdays, you can stream to RPAN, which is kind of like, they kind of fashioned it sort of like a local public access cable type thing. So that's what it looks like. So you can click through the channels of anybody who wants to do something on RPAN. And I always had this idea of doing something akin to Twitch plays Pokemon. And for people who don't know what that is, you basically have commands of what to do in the chat, and then a computer interpreted that. But in this case, there's no computer. So I'm just basically looking at the chat go by, and I'm trying to implement as many things from the chat as possible. And I am trying to, if multiple people suggest similar things, I give that higher notice. Or if somebody comes up with something amazingly creative or interesting, I go with that too. And
You
know,
are the
I
computer.
have, yeah. I originally had the weird idea of like and everybody in my games where I do this is controlling one player character. And originally I had this weird idea of just that one player character literally being like 100 player characters in one. So they could literally do anything that was in the player's handbook in terms of like actions. So they were all the classes, they were everything. So literally anybody could suggest anything in the chat. And the only restrictions on that were that I had set out some colored beads on the table, and those represented like magic points and health and stuff. So those were the restrictions. Somebody could easily say, I want to cast Fireball, and like a bunch of people could suggest Fireball, but you're only going to be able to do that, 5 times, and then you don't have any more magic for the day. So very quickly, people in the chat started to say, no, don't cast Fireball. We need to save those magic points till the end, because it's a dungeon crawl that people are trying to get through. So eventually, like a weird sort of cooperation started to happen. So even though sometimes, because RPAN is the way it is, sometimes you only have like 15 to like 50 people in the chat, and that they usually come to some sort of consensus. And if somebody has a good idea, then other people repeat that idea, so like that is on the screen longer. So I will generally do that. But then when you get like hundreds of people in the chat, that's when it sort of goes crazy. And it's very interesting to see what happens then, because people start suggesting stuff. People who just joined the channel, who don't know what the hell's going on, start suggesting stuff, and it gets pretty wild. But I read fast, and I've been doing a lot of improv and whatnot. So I've been doing my best to like do that, and it's very interesting and fun. And it's a way for me to use all the D&D stuff and terrain to put on the table, so people are looking at the D&D map with all the terrain and miniatures on it while all this is happening.
So just so I could get the proper view of what's going on here. So it's you and a player?
It is, whenever you are looking on RPAN, the camera is on the map.
Okay.
So you can only hear my voice and see my hands as I move stuff around on that.
And so it's just you in the chat then.
It's just me talking.
Yeah.
But the chat is open up to anybody who is watching on RPAN.
Yeah.
So anybody can type something in the chat. No restrictions.
So who are the quote unquote adventurers in this?
There's usually one. And like I said, I started out with this weird idea of having a hybrid adventurer who's like all adventurers in one.
But controlled by the chat.
But controlled by the chat. But then in later games, I started to be like, okay, at the beginning of the thing, I say, hey guys, give me suggestions for some sort of fantasy creature that can be our NPC for the day. Or originally I said fantasy adventurer, but people kept on like tossing in like weird suggestions. So like the last couple times we had a Sasquatch, we had a troglodyte monk, we had we've had a whole lot of different stuff happen.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's you putting out your terrain, and then you're kind of running the adventure, and then they're playing as the character. Years ago we had done through YouTube, we had done a Marvel Phase Rip game where the chat all ended up playing like different characters, and then for whatever reason they were all animals, and they eventually built a Voltron suit. They were like rats and pigeons and birds and dogs. It was crazy. How do you deal with the lag?
You just have to, by the time I'm done describing something, that what happens, usually RPAN is pretty good. Sometimes I have to kind of like pause after I say something while the chat kind of catches up with what's happening.
Yeah, because like with that game, the problem always was like the chat would try and weigh in, but like 30 seconds has actually passed since like the thing they're weighing in on happened. I mean, just like here, we were talking about something. We were talking about Kringle, and then someone in the chat was like, "Hey, do we get a Kringle cameo today?" Because there's like a 30-second delay or whatever.
Yeah.
We were reading your mind, chat. But yeah, so that part I imagine would be a lot tougher.
Yeah, but I think most people get the idea. The core group of people that like watch it eventually, because I think a lot of people are familiar with Twitch Plays Pokemon, so they understand like it's very, very short, very specific things, like but it's Reddit though, so there's a lot of shenanigans that were happening. Of course, like they get a meme in their head and like none of them want to let it go. So like they had a troglodyte, and for some reason a bunch of people. There was a troglodyte in a automated city of the future type scenario where there's a lot of like there's a lot of robotic fantasy robots, automatons wandering around. So they just had the troglodyte attempt to kiss as many of the robots as possible. And I'm sure this is some sort of meme I don't understand. And that carried over.
That sounds like a really like a bad version of Pepe Le Pew.
Yeah. Well, I had it because like troglodytes don't have lips. So I had it be like, this is like the troglodyte's traditional greeting is to press their mouth against someone else because they can't kiss anything. They don't have any lips. So that's how I interpreted that. But in the next game, it was a completely different game. And it was a gnome sorcerer encountering some grung. And the suggestions started pouring in again for the gnome to kiss the frog. And because, grungs are contact poison frogs, I decided to go, oh, well, this works out perfectly for me today.
Yeah.
So that led into some shenanigans as well.
As it always does. I mean, a normal D&D group leads to shenanigans. Multiply that number by 10, 20, 100. It only gets worse from there.
Yeah. But luckily, they're so disjointed that all the weird suggestions generally don't get through. So it's only when a bunch of people are on the same page about something that something like that manages to get through the chat.
Yeah. Wally DM says troglodytes don't have lips. I've learned something today. I run a game called Court of Worms, and it's like kind of like a land of the lost, and all the reptilian races are the main races. So whenever I describe them using any kind of like performers or musicians, there's never any woodwind or
Hmm.
brass.
It
Because
would be
how?
difficult.
Yeah, how do you do that without lips?
Yeah. But
Uh,
yeah, so that's the whole RPAN thing. It's one of those interesting things that just kind of came about because my traditional thing of going to the thrift store, and that was usually my sort of quasi weekly video of going to the thrift store, finding something, and then making a craft based on that, or just finding stuff and showing it off. That would happen, but unfortunately, content like that is very hard for me to make right now. So different stuff like, doing this, and I've done this on my YouTube channel too. And that was very interesting because I think most of the people that are subscribed to my YouTube channel and are really, really gung ho about it, they know what to expect. And so it was a different experience, but it was similar, but a lot different. So again, it's interesting to try out new stuff like this.
Absolutely. What do you think one of your best thrift finds is? I mean, was it the belay, or do you have something better?
I think the belay is definitely in terms of like nostalgia, in terms of finding something really from the past. I think that's it. In terms of like something like really cool, and also there's just so many. I'm just going to mention a couple because I can't pick favorites. It's difficult. For
Fine.
free, do you remember the old electronic D&D game?
Oh yeah, yeah.
With the I got the pewter dragon from that for free from actually about 2 years ago when I was at a outdoor a flea market. Somebody was just like throwing away a bunch of stuff, and I happened to notice, it's like, wait a minute, is that the dragon from the electronic D&D game? So I have that. I went into a thrift store and I saw a box for the Lord of the Rings produced by Games Workshop. So I got like this entire box of the Lord of the Rings starter set with the plastic resin miniatures. But within that set, somebody had put the entire collection of pewter, the 7 original adventurers, like the original Games Workshop pewter set
Uh,
for like Gandalf and all. So all of them were there, that somebody had just kind of stored inside that plastic starter set. So that was really neat. I like that a lot.
have you come across anything really valuable?
I found something which probably doesn't have a value. If you remember the Gauntlet 2 game, I believe it was, with the Jester. There was this was a random batch of miniatures that I found where there was this Jester miniature that looks like it had been made, because I know Reaper made originally the Gauntlet stuff, but I found out this was not something that was mass produced. This was a developer gift that was made just for the developers of this Gauntlet 2 game. It was a pewter miniature, which is not that valuable, I don't think. I think it's only sold recently for like, I don't know, $75, $100, whatnot. But
When you say Gauntlet, I just think of the video game. To be honest.
yeah. No, this is the updated video game. Specifically the one with the Jester.
Okay.
But yeah, so that was one that was worth a lot. It was the Gauntlet Dark Legacy. Jester pewter figure from Midway Games. It was a developer gift. So that's something where like I'm gonna keep that forever because I don't know how rare that is, because like that's something where it's just like there's really not that many of them. So that's something that was interesting.
It's, it's probably better not to figure out what it's worth. It might be too tempting.
Yeah. No. I definitely, that's in my collection. Stuff that's worth a lot of money. I found a massive bag of dragon dice. Now, I don't know if you remember dragon dice from the day. That
Not
was
really. Maybe if I saw them.
That was the official dragon dice was I don't know if that was Hasbro or Wizard of the Coast. Let's see here. Dragon Dice was the collectible dice game originally made by TSR back in 1995. And just for the sheer amount of dice in that bag, that was probably one of the most valuable things that I've ever found, because there was just so many of them. So even though Dragon dice sets by themselves are, pretty reasonably priced,
Yeah.
it was such a massive garbage bag of these dice that, like, literally, I think that's probably up there in the most valuable D&D thing that I've found.
Yeah, I recognize it now. Looking at images, it's going back a little ways too. What do you
Um,
have tips for people that are getting into thrift? Looking for thrift finds.
yeah, don't get into the mindset where you have to buy absolutely everything. If you are going someplace like if you're lucky enough to go to someplace like Goodwill by the pound, you can kind of get away with that because you're literally just paying like a set pound price for stuff. So but like, you can very easily fall into the trap of just buying too much, just kind of random stuff that you'll never actually end up using. If you can see something where it's like, I want to buy that because I want to do this with that, or I want to buy that because it's specifically something very interesting from the past, or something I recognize as a specific Dungeons and Dragon things. That's one thing, but you can kind of get into the thing of like, oh, I want to buy these random cheap dragons because they're dragons. And it's just
Yeah.
like, you don't want to waste your money like that. It's very easy to waste your money, even if you're buying cheap stuff, because every dollar adds up. But yeah, there will be, different locations. It depends, because thrift stores are incredibly, and I mean incredibly different. But there usually will be a location where there's puzzles. And for some reason, a lot of D&D stuff kind of ends up with the puzzles and not with the board games proper for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but there always will be a book section to look through, and usually there'll be a board game section next to that. But yeah, check out where they have the stacks and stacks of puzzles, because for some reason D&D stuff generally sometimes gets mixed in with that. I think it's just because of the labeling on D&D stuff looks like nice and stuff.
Do you have
And
strategies when you go out, or is it like you just go and see what you can find?
I generally just go and see what I can find. If there are days when the Goodwill by the pound has stuff coming out, I used to try to go to those days when I know this is when they're going to be putting out stuff. But I mean, it really is luck of the draw a lot of the times, sadly. Like, I found a bunch of the D&D, a bunch of the Partha Pewter, which is the Ral Partha giftware versions of the miniatures, which is very interesting, because the D&D miniatures and the giftware miniatures,
Uh-huh.
if you remember back in the day, anybody who's around during the 90s, if you went into a gift store and you saw the little pewter wizards and stuff, you'd always see like official D&D miniatures mixed in with that, but they have massive like fake gems stuck in their eyes and stuff like that. So that stuff is actually interesting, because the giftware versions of some of the Partha Pewter stuff, which is the same mold as the D&D miniatures, sometimes the giftware miniatures were actually made of a better quality metal, which will last longer and are actually kind of more in demand now. But it depends on what you're looking for.
What is something that you found that added something new to one of your games, like inspired you to like, this is going to be a whole campaign, this is going to be an adventure arc?
Uh, the boats that I found inspired a whole kind of series of events where like a whole like part of a campaign where the players kind of had to cross this lake to get to this mysterious island. So that definitely contributed to that. That was something I wouldn't have done if I hadn't have found these boats. Just trying to think here. There's bits of terrain that I love pulling out all the time. The dinosaur stuff, the very nice, Schleich miniatures, or however you pronounce that. the Schleich dinosaurs inspired an entire dinosaur sort of dungeon crawl, just based on the fact that these dinosaurs were so much massive. They were so much bigger than the D&D scale dinosaurs and stuff. So it was kind of like a, this portal which had been letting through all these random dinosaurs from this other place into this fantasy world, and people just didn't know how to react to it because they're used to massive dragons and stuff like that, but these were a little bit different of a threat. So that definitely inspired an entire dungeon crawl there. I'm trying to think. I just little bits and bobs. I mean, there's always, the Dream Blade stuff, they definitely helped inspire an entire thing just because there's weird mechanical things and stuff. So that the Mage Knight and Dream Blade stuff really inspired some like just bizarre robotic stuff. Like,
do you do a lot of like mini bashing, kit bashing?
Oh yeah. I mean, it used to be just rebasing when I was first starting out. But now I I have a Mage Knight miniature that I had rebased and repainted. And now I will craft a little top hat for him and put a top hat on this robot. So now he is part of the robotic aristocracy.
Oh, nice.
and that's a whole point. So yeah, I like doing the modifications that I make with most of my miniatures are pretty simple, but I mean, it's good to, because especially with wargaming stuff, you'll get a lot of the same miniature. So it's good to make it stand out in some way, make it slightly different.
Yeah, you get along good with Ted. His bit spin is pretty large.
Yeah.
So I saw on your channel you did this really cool mechanical cobra trap.
Yes, that is like the sort of traditional video that I used to do. Yeah. And the only reason I was able to do that is because McFarlane came out with a new toy line of these mechanical animals. And it's kind of like a callback to his 90s heyday. Is like robotic assault weapons or something like that. But the only reason I was able to do that because those were available online for a cheap price, which generally is something you can't find. Because even if something is like at the dollar store, you can't generally go to the dollar store and then have it shipped, because you need to buy like a pallet of these cheap robots or whatever to get them shipped to you. And I don't want to do that. But this is one of those rare cases where you can find a cheap toy online, because this was like $9, the price I paid for it, which is like, that's certainly much more than I would usually pay for something like this, because cheap snake miniatures, you can find a lot of those at thrift stores. But this was so nice because it was already looked like a mechanical snake, and I just had the idea to deal with it. So it's just like, yeah, it worked out perfectly. This is something I could buy for cheap, have it shipped to me, and then I could just do this video where I showed how I did some pretty I was working with new materials. So I wish I would have done more with the sculpt-a-mold stuff, but I think it looks really good at the end. It's a very nice piece of terrain.
Did the purchase inspire the build, or did the build inspire the purchase?
I knew I wanted to do something with it, but it wasn't until I physically got the thing in my hands and realized it was actually in two parts, and realized the one part was hard plastic, very detailed, and the other part wasn't. And I kind of in my head, and I think somebody in the YouTube comments said something about like something, and I realized it's like, oh yeah, this thing wouldn't probably make a good creature, but it'd be really cool if it was just this mechanical guardian that just kind of like gets raised out of the earth to protect an ancient temple or something. So that's I kind of got the idea once I physically had the thing in my hand. So
do you find yourself where you make a lot of purchases like that, where it's like, you see a thing, you're like, I don't know what this is, and then you get it, and it's like, okay, now this is how it's going to go into my game?
Usually no. I think I got lucky with that one, but it's usually like if I'm at like the thrift store, or if I'm at a store and I see something on clearance, I will get a general idea of like, this is kind of what I want to do with this. And it's tough sometimes because I guess I am one of those people that has to actually physically like have the item in their hands for them to like realize what they want to do with it. So it's tough to see. A lot of people like do a lot of cool stuff with like bits and like, just parts of stuff they can buy online. But I could never example like get like one of those kits where you can make like an abandoned city. But you have to you have these generic bits that you have to set up. I don't know how well I would do with that because like I wouldn't know what to buy unless I went to a game store and saw like the bits laid out, So I do stuff. I do custom stuff mostly then,
Yeah. So when you're playing, you're running your games. I imagine you're a terrain guy, mostly terrain. Do you do like from beginning to end? Do you do kind of like where you'll see the full like layout that's covered, or do you do like more like set pieces?
I've done it both ways. The mostly what I have is I have the Chessex map
Mhm.
set up so I can draw on it with the wet erase markers and then have bits of miniatures and terrain on that map to complement that. Or I will have like, if I'm doing like, and I've run games at public libraries, I've run games at game stores and comic book stores, and I've only run one game at a convention. But usually if I'm running a game like at a game store and I'm doing a dungeon crawl, a very specific dungeon crawl, then I will set out the dungeon in like tiles and terrain and have it set up and then actually cover it with bandanas, like you said.
Yeah.
So as they go forward, I will reveal parts of the map. So I will do that if I have the space and I know it's a very specific dungeon crawl. But if it's more of a campaign thing, I really don't know where the players are going to go. I have the campaign written out, and you can assume the players might want to go into this specific dungeon-like area or a very, laid out area, but they might just change their minds and go someplace else. So in that case, the erasable map with the terrain bits to help accent that. That's generally what I do.
Yeah, that's the technique Ted has been using a lot of. The kind of like the maps laid out with a bunch of scatter and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
But
Scatter. I always forget the name of that.
I only know from interacting with other crafters. I have no idea. I mean, for me, I may put out stuff, but it's going to be like it's not WYSIWYG when I put it out most of the time, and it's just like this guy. Imagine that's an ogre, and just to get a general idea for the more complex combats. Because like also like when I see one of those like massive Dwarven Forge layouts, I'm just like, man, like I would love to play in that, but I would hate to run that as the GM.
Yeah,
I
no,
just
I love that, but it only works, I think, if you are doing a very specific dungeon crawl. If you're
yeah.
doing a dungeon crawl, 2 to 3 hours, a very specific map, a very specific set of parameters of what the PCs need to do. That works perfectly, and that's great. But with a campaign where like the party has more choice, it's just like, I do not know about that. And when I'm doing that kind of stuff, I will have specific miniatures and terrain set up, especially if it's some sort of puzzle. If it's some sort of puzzle where there's different elements on the map that need to visually represent parts of the puzzle, I will definitely have that. And just to screw with my players, I will also have random bits of terrain that don't have anything to do with the puzzle, which are also on the map.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
it's very interesting. And I always don't make the mistake of trying to plan stuff too much. Everything is open-ended, even the puzzles and whatnot. And I wish I could, describe in detail how I organize these, but it's just like, you have to realize that D&D especially, there's a lot of high level stuff that players can just do to like solve a puzzle without actually solving the puzzle. And the cost and reward of that is they use their spells and abilities to do this. But usually in D&D, there will always be either a cost or they won't be able to use those spell slots. So I try to arrange stuff so it's like they're going to be in a dangerous space, so they can't just sit there and sleep for 4 nights in a row to use magic to solve all their issues, so they don't actually have to solve any of the puzzles.
Yeah.
There's usually some sort of threat there to make sure that they have to be focusing on what's going on rather than just focusing on what's on their character sheet as a problem solver. So
Many times when I do puzzles anymore, I don't actually even come up with a solution. I just wait to see what they come up with and pick the one that sounds the best.
Mm.
Only, or if I do have like a rough idea, I'll have that just if they need help or clues or whatever. But for the most part, I just let them do their thing, and they usually come up with something. And sometimes they'll even come up with a better solution than what I had intended. Anyway.
Yeah, I like there was this whole thing where like in the latest, when I was doing the improv D&D thing about the automated city thing, like there was this pit in the middle of the automated cities where these horrific like mutated creatures would come up every night. And like there was another area where there was like this building that was infested with these acidic snails. And there was another area where there was like this kind of automated street sweeper car that would go through and just, scoop up anything that was in the street and like dump it in certain locations. So like that wasn't part of a puzzle, but like literally a group of people came up with the thing of like, they're going to arrange it so all the acidic snails go into the street, and then the street sweeper will sweep them up and dump all these acidic snails into the pit in the middle of the city and kill all the mutants with the acidic snails. And it's just like, yeah, it's really like, it seems like I planned it for them to do that.
Yeah.
But I absolutely did not. Those were just disparate things that I had put in there as obstacles. Like they weren't meant to be like a video game puzzle where it's like you use this with this to do this. But that's just how it ended up. And it made perfect logical sense. It honestly looked like I had planned for them to do that. And I 100% did not.
Let me see if I understand this correctly. You have a pit with mutated creatures in it, right?
Yep.
But the street sweepers dump the trash of the city into the pit.
Yes.
So the city probably created these mutated creatures, and now the players have to figure out how to murder them all.
No, the story is that when the robotics took over the city, the people that were able to survive kind of hid in this pit because the vast majority of them that weren't killed were actually just swept up by the street sweeper. But they were kind of stuck because the robots are only out during the day. So, but there's no way for them to get from the center of the city to the exit to get fully out of the city during the night cycle. It's just even if like they just ran as fast as they possibly could, it's just it's just not possible to do. So they're trying to figure out what to do, and eventually, because the street sweeper was shoving literally every random bit of thing, like broken mutagen bottles, broken chemicals and whatnot, and they're basically stuck underground, basically eventually evolving into this horrific mutants, and just not able to escape the city. Like every night they'll get up and run around the city trying to find food and stuff, but like they're just stuck there for years until they became just horrific monsters. So that's basically how that worked out for that. And that's a dungeon crawl, but I've been thinking that would be cool to like add as part of like a big campaign.
That was definitely an interesting dynamic. I think the city is actually the true villains though. This story.
Yeah,
and their toxic waste.
Yeah, I mean, it was the city of, and I got to change the name because it's too close, but it was the city of Wonder Amazement.
Yeah.
And it was set up to be like the World's Fair of fantasy, where it's just like, we don't have to live in this violent fantasy world anymore. We can use our new technology to make sure that everything is safe and everything works great. And we don't have to worry about all these monsters, and we don't have to worry about all these horrific, hard medieval life that we live. We can live in this mechanical world blessed by Gond. But obviously some stuff went horrifically wrong and it didn't work out.
Do you like doing a lot of genre moshing?
This was actually the first time I kind of like really did it. I know that there's some concepts in like Warhammer when it comes to like mutations and stuff that I really like using in, you know, the D&D setting, just because, you know, it's interesting, like, you know, the gameplay of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, where you just have to watch out for all these horrific ways for your player not only to die, but to mutate, and for just a fate worse than death, literally. That generally speaking, you don't really have to worry about that much in D&D, but there are those aspects in there that a lot of people don't use. So genre mixing is one thing, but this is more of, you know, having a much more serious play style where it's just like players really have to kind of think things out, because there's more of D&D has like, take I always talk about this. I don't want to switch topics too much, but people say it's like, oh, once you get past the earlier levels, D&D is easy. 5e becomes easy. And it's just like, no, not really. There's a lot of monsters whose abilities negate abilities that would save players, and they're very specifically designed to do so. Take Vampire Spawn. Once players get to a certain spot in D&D, they can just be like, oh, I don't have to worry about enemies, because even if I die, healing word, I'm not dying anymore. It's fine.
Yeah.
But then Vampire Spawn come along. And Vampire Spawn, if they kill you, you instantly die. So no more 3 rounds of possible rolling for, you know, saying you're dead, and healing word won't work on you because you're dead. Similar things like the, there's all sorts of different things. The Gibbering Mound, which is one of my favorite monsters.
Mouther, yeah.
Yeah. Like that doesn't, what the Gibbering Mouther does to you, you can't use a resurrection spell to rescue that person. They literally get turned into a Gibbering Mound, which is not something you can use a resurrection spell. So there's various things in D&D that I think a lot of people ignore at the higher levels that actually start to negate some of the abilities that a lot of people assume make the game too easy. So in genre bending, it's not so much that I like taking in different genres, but I like stealing stuff from other rule sets to kind of augment what's already in 5e to make the game a little bit more, I don't want to say grimdark, but a little bit more serious in terms of like what can happen. You know?
Yeah, I mean, we did a whole video on you don't have enough hit points, because it was just basically about monsters and threats that circumnavigate your hit points, and they don't really matter. You know, kind of like what you're talking about. There's a couple monsters too, Intellect Devourer and Shadows, that are they're very low challenge, but they punch way above their belt, and they have a certain finality to them as well.
Yeah. You know, it's a scariness to like what's going on, which I think some people lose, and it's just like I don't know, but it all depends. I think that you know, my games can change dramatically, whether it's a dungeon crawl that I know there's a lot of experienced people there that I know, you know, they might want more of a challenge, compared to a dungeon crawl where it's just like I'm really focusing on creative solutions. Like your experience level with D&D doesn't matter, but you know, hopefully it'll get kind of hammered into you that you can't just smash your head against the wall trying to solve a problem. You have to do something creative, or else it's not going to work. Compared to a campaign where, you know, that's just going to be customized to whoever is playing it, really.
Do you prefer homebrew content or official content?
It honestly depends. If you're doing a dungeon crawl, I prefer official content only for the DM and the players. For a campaign, I generally lean towards supplementing the official content with a little bit of homebrewed rules, not that many, but like the setting is generally going to be a little bit more custom. Because with rules, I've had so many bad experiences with working with players where a lot of people have gotten into the I need to win at D&D.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Let
me rephrase that a little bit. Running official content or creating your own homebrew content, as far not necessarily the rules, but the adventures you.
Oh yeah, no. I don't think I've ever really run anything from the books except for for the Frost Maiden.
Yeah.
That was very interesting. I really like that. That's the one that I did run. But the vast majority of it has been taking stuff from the official rules, but then just kind of putting it in my own setting and stuff. I love the Forgotten Realms. Most of my stuff does technically take place in the Forgotten Realms, but it gives you enough leeway that you can really just add anything
You
that
are
you
on
like.
the Ed Greenwood track, you know.
I like Ed Greenwood.
He's a librarian. He's been a librarian forever in addition to creating content.
Yeah. I have both of the books. I have the Forgotten Realms books. Is interesting. I love the fact that he talks about eating monsters in detail in his books.
Yeah.
I love stuff like that. So yeah, maybe I am. I don't know.
I mean, it's not a bad path to be on. He is the godfather of Forgotten Realms,
Yeah.
or the father
I
of
mean,
Forgotten Realms.
I just like Forgotten Realms because it's familiar enough to everybody who's
Yeah.
sort of familiar with fantasy. It's not generic at all, but it's familiar enough that everybody can kind of get a starting off point. I've had a lot of bad experiences as a player with homebrew, where somebody will be like, these are dark elves, but they don't act at all like dark elves have ever acted.
Yeah.
So it's just like, okay, if you have monsters that don't act like dark elves, don't call them dark elves.
Yeah. Come up with
But
another name.
yeah, come up with your name. It's fine if your dark elves are different in appearance or they're slightly different. But if they act completely different than dark elves, don't call them dark elves. Call them something slightly different, so you're not dealing with you don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but I don't know. I've as a player, I've not had that much good experience with homebrewed rules, and so even in the games where I do introduce homebrewed concepts mechanically, I will try to keep a lot of stuff from the rule book, and I will try to keep it within the context of the Forgotten Realms. I mean, because you can always have the players go to different worlds that are different from that starting point.
Yeah, we've only ever made minor changes when it comes to homebrew rules. Little things like, we allow our Dragonborn to use their breath weapon as a bonus action instead of an action. Or
Yeah.
we've tweaked, critical hits. We play with that from time to time. And generally it's mostly for the players, on the player side of things anyway, because whenever you change anything, it's going to affect them much more drastically than it's going to affect us as GMs. So it's like when I hear a player like, "Well, why can't I just cut off their hands and make a call shot?" Because if they start cutting off hands, you guys are going to run out of hands way before I do, and it won't be fun.
Yeah.
So it's like when we do homebrew, it's like, well, what's going to be the effect of the change, and is it going to be more fun for everybody at the table?
Yeah. I mean, Scott Kurtz made the rule of not Scott Kurtz talked to Z animated spellbook guy, and a thing where they're talking about okay, I encounter a guard who's drunk and fall asleep. I can't just kill him. And at that point, I think you have to make the call, what makes sense in that situation.
Yeah.
Where it's just I mean, it's I don't want to say Deus Ex Machina or whatever, but it's just there's. I mean, I would probably make the call that you would probably just be able to kill this guard if you'd like. But hopefully the players would realize that unless there'd be, they realize things sort of make sense in my world. So it makes certain things make sense. And some people just don't understand, there's a certain level of if they want to play a game like that, there's a certain level of realism of cause and effect that needs to happen with their characters if they're going to work in a world like that. Like you said, they're going to run out of hands a lot quicker than the monsters will.
Yeah. It's narrative versus the game, right?
Yeah.
And it's figuring out what is going to be the most fun. I remember an early game of AD&D where we had a villain tied up, and they're rolling around on the ground, and we're trying to finish them off. And it was just or maybe they weren't even rolling around. It's just hacking them apart instead of it maybe the DM just going, you know what? There's a whole party of adventurers. This one guy isn't doing anything. They're not going to threaten you. Why am I going to have you make rolls until you do what you're trying to do, unless something changes.
Yeah, I don't go with the rule of cool, because that just eventually, I don't like that phrase or the idea behind it. I go with the rule of like, well, what makes kind of sense in a fantasy setting,
Yeah,
and it's just, the vast majority of the time, I keep things moving. That's what I like to do.
that makes sense.
Yeah. And my players eventually realize there's a real chance of like failure in my games. I was talking about the dungeon crawl that I ran for during my first convention. And that was a bunch of people that were subscribed to my channel that did that. And half of them died horribly before they were able to get out of the dungeon. So,
But stuff like that, too, is just a matter of expectations, right? It's like, do they know what game they signed up for?
yeah. I would not spring something like that on people without explaining to them what kind of thing they're going into.
And that's the key, because you can get away with running almost any kind of game as long as you match the right people to the right game.
Yeah, and as long as you're clear with your communication too, that makes sense.
For most things in life too, right?
Oh yeah.
So Cal, we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
No, I mean, unfortunately, I tried to keep my thoughts clear, but unfortunately, I might have be a little bit more mishmashed. I am going to be trying to force myself to do some more writing. Actually, I'm trying to come up with, in addition to the stuff that I am doing now on my YouTube channel, where I do craft stuff, I talk about D&D and I review D&D products every once in a while. I'm going to be trying to do a little bit more writing, and I want to come up with a list of near useless D&D items. My favorite so far are a couple things. It's the Wand of Explosions, which when activated explodes.
Nice.
The Ring of Detect Object, which can only be used to detect itself. And there's a bunch of stuff. So I look for that, because I am working on that to be released as a small little PDF of near useless items.
I will have to keep that in mind when I need near useless items in my game.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on. And as always, everyone, until next time, stay nerdy. And we're out.